Clara Belle came walking out of the line shack at sunrise with blood on her sleeve, frost in her hair, and no name left in the town that had thrown her away. 3 days earlier, Mercy Bend had watched a banker call her a liar. A sheriff turned his eyes aside, and a quiet rancher led her out past the last fence line, like a burden nobody wanted. Now she carried a dented tin box against her heart, and every step through the prairie dust seemed to drag a secret behind her. Men stopped hammering. Women stopped whispering. Even the horses lifted their heads as if they could feel the lie cracking open. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. By the time Clara Belle reached the edge of Mercy Bend, the morning train was crying in the distance. Its whistle ran low across the prairie, lonely and long, passing over the roofs of the mercantile, the blacksmith shed, the church steeple, and the row of false front buildings that made the town look braver than it was. Dust lifted in pale sheets along the street. A loose shutter knocked against the hotel. Somewhere behind the livery, a dog barked twice and then fell quiet. Clara walked past all of it with her chin up. Her blue calico dress was torn at the hem. Her boots were caked in dry mud. One sleeve was dark where blood had dried beneath the elbow, and her hair, usually pinned neat beneath a widow's black bonnet, hung loose over her shoulders. In her arms she carried a tin box no wider than a Bible, wrapped in a flour sack, and held so tight her knuckles had gone white. No one spoke at first. That was the thing Clara noticed. Not the staring, not the judgment, not even the fear that moved through the faces along the boardwalk. It was the silence. Mercy Bend had never been silent about her before. For 7 weeks, the town had called her many things: fraud, drifter, sinful woman, claim jumper, poor thing, when they wanted to sound kind, no-name widow when they did not. But that morning, Clara Belle walked through the middle of town, as if every ugly word had fallen off her back somewhere between the line shack and the first hitching rail. At the smithy, old Amos Pike lowered his hammer. On the porch of the dry goods store, Mrs. Winifred pressed a hand to her chest. Near the bank step, Silas Voss stood still as fence wire. He was a narrow man in a fine brown suit, with a silver watch chain across his vest, and a face built for smiling, only when it cost him nothing. He had been the loudest voice against Clara. He had told the town she was not truly married to Thomas Bell. He had said Thomas never left a wife, only unpaid debts and a woman with no papers. He had said she came to Mercy Bend to steal land that did not belong to her. He had said it so calmly that people believed him. Now, watching Clara come out of the morning dust with that tin box in her arms, Silas Voss did not smile. A horse shifted outside the livery. Its rider had just swung down when Clara stepped into the street. Jonah Reed saw her then. He was tall, sun-browned, and quiet in the way of men who had learned to keep their own counsel because speaking once, at the wrong time, had cost too much. He owned the Rocking R, a ranch 10 miles north, where the grass rolled like green water in spring and turned gold by June. His hat was pulled low, his coat still dusted from the trail. One leather glove hung from his hand. For a heartbeat, he looked at Clara as if she were a ghost. Then, he saw the blood. He moved before anyone else did. Clara. She stopped in the middle of the street. The way he said her name cut through her, harder than the wind had. Not Mrs. Bell, not widow, not ma'am. Clara. She had not heard it said with kindness since Thomas died. Jonah took one step toward her, then another. He did not reach for her. My bay. He remembered the last time he had put a hand near her elbow, when the town had gathered outside the church and Silas Voss had demanded that she be removed from decent company until the matter was settled. Jonah had been the man who rode beside the wagon, taking her to the old line shack beyond Miller's draw. He had not tied her there. He had not locked the door. He had left her with flour, beans, a lantern, and one apology that sounded more like a stone dropping into a well. "I don't know what else to do," he had said. Clara had looked at him then, with rain running down her face and the prairie swallowing the wagon tracks behind them. "Then, that is what should shame you." Now he stood in front of her, and shame was plainly there. "You're hurt?" he said. "I am standing. That is not the same thing." "No," she said. "It is not." A murmur moved along the boardwalk. Silas Voss stepped down from the bank porch. "Mrs. Bell, I advise you to be careful." Clara turned her head toward him. The movement was slow, but everyone saw how his words touched something in her. Not fear, not confusion, something sharper. "Which name are you advising?" she asked. The street went still again. Silas blinked. "I beg your pardon. You called me Lilydale last Thursday," Clara said. Her voice was hoarse, but it carried. "At the church. Before that, you called me a vagrant from Abilene. Before that, a woman with no marriage, no claim, and no right to sign Thomas Bell's name beside mine. So I am asking which woman you are warning this morning," Mrs. Pruitt whispered. "Lord preserve us." Sheriff Nolan stepped out of his office, suspenders loose over his shirt, and worry already creasing his face. "Clara, my bae, you ought to come inside before this grows. Grew without me," she said. "It can stand in daylight with me." Jonah's eyes moved to the tin box. "What happened at the shack?" Clara swallowed. For the first time since she had entered town, her grip trembled. "They came before dawn." "Moo." She looked past Jonah to Silas Voss. Silas tightened. "This is nonsense. They thought I was still sleeping," Clara said. "They poured coal oil under the back wall. One of them said the banker wanted no scraps left." A woman gasped. Silas gave a short laugh. "That is a wicked accusation from a desperate woman." "I was desperate 3 days ago," Clara said. "This morning, I am only tired." Her knees wavered then. Jonah saw it and stepped closer, but she shook her head once, refusing him. "Not yet. Not in front of them. Not before she said what she had walked 6 miles to say." Clara lifted the tin box. Thomas Bell kept his letters in this. His army discharge, his land note, the marriage lines from Reverend Caleb Pike in Fort Laramie, and one paper I did not understand until last night. Silas' face changed so quickly that only Jonah, who was watching him as a rancher watches the sky for storm signs, saw the panic pass through it. Sheriff Nolan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bell, you said those papers were missing." "They were." Clara's eyes stayed on Silas. "Some of them were. But Thomas did not trust men who smiled over ledgers. He made copies." The town seemed to breathe in all at once. Jonah felt the words strike him harder than he expected. Copies. That meant there had been originals. That meant Silas had lied when he said none existed. It meant Clara might have been exactly who she claimed from the first day she stepped off the train, with a black dress, a wedding ring, and grief so fresh she looked carved out of it. And Jonah had believed the wrong man. He had not wanted to. That was the miserable truth. Some part of him had known Clara's eyes were too steady for deceit. He had seen swindlers before. He had seen claim jumpers cry on command and thieves kneel with scripture in their hands. Clara had done none of that. She had stood alone in the churchyard and said, "My husband is dead, and I have come for what he left me, because he told me Mercy Bend was the one place we could begin again." But Thomas Bell was dead in a railroad camp grave. Clara had arrived with no living witness. Silas Voss held the banknotes and the town records. And Jonah Reed had been a coward in a clean coat, telling himself caution was wisdom. The wind shifted. Clara swayed. This time Jonah did not ask permission. He caught her by the shoulders before she fell. The tin box slipped, but she clutched it to her chest. Easy, he said low. I have you. Her eyes lifted to his. You had me once before, she whispered. The words struck the air between them. Jonah's mouth tightened. I know. Silas Voss stepped forward. Sheriff, I demand you take that box, if she is carrying stolen bank property. Jonah turned. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. If you touch her or that box before the sheriff hears her full account, you will answer to me. The banker stared at him. So did the town. Jonah Reed was known for many things: fair dealing, good horses, a quiet manner, a grief he never named. He was not known for making threats in the street. Sheriff Nolan shifted uneasily. Now, Jonah, no, Jonah said. Not this time. Clara's fingers tightened against his sleeve. Not this time. The words meant more than the street could know. Silas' lips thinned. You would put your ranch behind her story. Jonah looked down at Clara. Her face was pale with pain, dust, and exhaustion. But her eyes held his as if she were waiting to see whether he had finally found the courage he had lacked. Yes, he said. I would. The church bell rang then, though it was not yet Sunday service. One clear note rolled through Mercy Bend. Then another. The sound startled everyone into looking toward the white steeple at the end of the street. A boy came running from that direction, waving his cap. Sheriff, he shouted. Fire out by Miller's Draw. Smoke's coming from the old no-name shack. Clara closed her eyes. Jonah felt her body go rigid in his arms. The line shack had burned, whatever the men had hoped to destroy. They thought it was gone. But Clara Bell had walked out before the flames could swallow the truth, and now the whole town was waiting to hear what had survived with her. They took Clara to the sheriff's office because it was the only place in Mercy Bend with a door stout enough to keep out both weather and gossip. Jonah carried her the last few steps, though she protested until her voice gave out. He set her in the chair by the stove, then stood between her and the window, where faces gathered like crows on a fence. Sheriff Nolan pulled the shade halfway down. It did little good. Shadows still moved behind the glass. Doc Merriweather arrived with his black bag smelling of tobacco, horse lemon, and peppermint drops. He cleaned the cut on Clara's arm and found a burn along her wrist where she had crawled past the line shack stove after the fire caught. You are fortunate, he said. Clara looked at the floor. I am alive. I have not decided yet if that is fortune. The doctor had no answer for that. Jonah did. It is, he said quietly. She did not look at him. Sheriff Nolan sat behind his desk, rubbing both hands over his face. He was a good man when goodness did not require speed. In a frontier town, that meant he was useful for drunks, horses, and fence disputes, but less useful when a rich man lied in a press suit. Mrs. Bell, he said, I need you to tell it plain. Clara gave a dry, broken laugh. Plain is all I have left. Jonah moved to the wall, giving her space. He deserved none of her trust, and he knew it. She set the tin box on the sheriff's desk. The sound of it landing seemed heavier than iron. My husband was Thomas Bell, she said. He worked freight out of Cheyenne, then rail grading west of here. We married last winter at Fort Laramie before Reverend Caleb Pike. Thomas bought 160 acres along Cottonwood Creek through a land note held at this bank. Silas Voss stood near the door with his hat in hand, appearing wounded by the inconvenience of being accused. That note is not in dispute, he said. Thomas Bell held debt. He died before satisfying it. Clara looked at him. He died after paying half and arranging the rest through cattle work for the rocking arm. Jonah's head lifted. What? Clara's eyes flicked to him. Thomas told me he made an agreement with you. Jonah stepped away from the wall. I made an agreement with a Tom Bell last fall. He helped trail 30 head through sleep when my hands were down with fever. I paid him in cash and signed a receipt. Silas Voss spread his hands. A common name. There was nothing common about my husband, Clara said. The sheriff opened the tin box. Inside lay a folded handkerchief, 2 letters tied with faded blue ribbon, a small tin type of a bearded man, and several folded documents wrapped in oilcloth. Clara pointed to the first. That is the copy of our marriage lines, Sheriff. Nolan unfolded it carefully. Jonah watched his face change. It says Thomas Bell and Clara Whitcomb, the sheriff murmured. My maiden name, Clara said. I took Bell after her. Silas stepped closer. No, Jonah said. Silas gave him a cold look. This is a legal matter. Then the law can read it without your fingers on it. Sheriff Nolan scanned the paper again. Signed Caleb Pike. Reverend Pike is Amos Pike's brother, Clara said. Everyone turned toward the smithy through the window, as if the blacksmith might hear his name through wood and glass. Sheriff Nolan frowned. Amos never said. Amos did not know me, Clara said. I came here believing the bank had record enough. Thomas wrote that Mr. Voss had everything prepared. Silas sighed. This is where grief has tangled her memory. I had correspondence with Thomas, yes, but no marriage record reached this office. No wife's name was listed. No transfer could be honored. Clara's hand went to the second paper. Scene. Why is my name in your handwriting? The room changed. Not with noise, with the lack of it. Even the stove seemed to stop ticking. Sheriff Nolan unfolded the second document. Jonah moved close enough to see. It was a copy of a bank receipt. The ink faded but legible. Thomas Bell, $100 received toward Cottonwood Creek notes. Beneath it, in a smaller line, remaining settlement to be completed upon arrival of wife, Clara Bell. Sheriff Nolan looked up. Silas, the banker's face, had gone pale beneath his mustache. That could be forged. By whom? Clara asked. The woman you said could barely write her own name. A faint flush spread along his neck. That had been one of his cruelties. When Clara first came to town, dusty from the train and weak from a week of travel, she had signed the hotel ledger with a shaking hand. Silas saw it and told everyone her penmanship looked like a child copying church cards. He had not mentioned her fingers were numb from cold. The sheriff turned the paper toward the light. Looks like your script. Silas' mouth tightened. Many men write alike. Jonah thought of his own ranch ledgers. He thought of the note from Voss folded in his desk, warning that his loan could be called if he sheltered any party involved in disputed property. He thought of the way Silas had leaned across the bank counter 3 days before and said, You know what happens when a town tolerates false widows, Jonah. We learned that lesson once. That last line had done the work, because Jonah had learned it once. His younger sister Ruth had been 19 when a traveling merchant accused her of stealing from his till. Silas Voss had urged the town to let the law settle it. Jonah, 23, and frightened of losing the ranch after their parents died, stayed silent until proof came too late. Ruth left Mercy Bend before dawn, shamed and broken. She died of lung fever 2 years later in a mining camp, and Jonah had carried the guilt like a stone in his chest ever since. Silas knew where to press, so Jonah had watched Clara be sent away to the no-name shack, a shelter so forgotten nobody had bothered to paint a proper sign over the door. A poor widow with no witness, a shack with no name, a town with no courage. Clara lifted the third folded paper. This I found beneath a loose board last night. Thomas wrote it before he died, but he must have feared it would not reach me. Her hand trembled. Jonah reached for the paper, then stopped himself. She noticed. After a moment, she gave it to him. That small act hurt worse than if she had refused. Jonah unfolded the letter and read aloud because her voice had faded. My Clara, if anything happens to me before I get back, do not trust Voss alone. I paid enough to hold the creek land, and I left a copy in the North Line shack under the third floorboard by the stove. If they tell you I never named you, know that I wrote your name everywhere it mattered. I was poor when I married you, but not so poor I would leave you nameless. Clara closed her eyes. No one moved. Jonah finished the last line softly. You are my wife before God, before paper, and before any man who thinks ink belongs only to him. The sheriff bowed his head a little. Silas Voss recovered first. Men like him always did. A touching letter proves nothing about arson nor about ownership. And as for this wild claim that someone attacked her shack, grief and smoke can make ghosts out of shadows. Clara opened her eyes. I know one of them. Silas froze. S-O-D-U, she said. The sheriff leaned forward. Name him. Will Barton. A stir rose outside. Will Barton was a hired rider, known for doing jobs that decent men did not ask about in daylight. He had been seen often at the bank's stable, and more often at the saloon with money he had not earned honestly. Silas shook his head. Absurd. Will left town yesterday. No, Clara said. He left after dawn. He rode a sorrel with one white stocking. His right spur drags because the rowel is bent. I heard it when he walked the porch. I heard it again when he ran. Jonah looked at her with new understanding. She had not simply survived. She had listened. She had gathered the world in pieces while it tried to destroy her. Sheriff Nolan stood. I will send men after her. Silas put on his hat. Send all the men you like. But until a court rules otherwise, that woman has no legal claim. And if Jonah Reed shelters her, he does it at his own risk. He opened the office door. The gathered townspeople scattered backward, pretending they had not been listening. Silas paused on the threshold and looked back at Clara. This town has been generous to you, he said. Do not mistake patience for weakness. Jonah stepped forward. No, you mistook silence for weakness. The banker's eyes narrowed. Then he left. The office remained quiet for a long moment. Sheriff Nolan exhaled. Jonah, I cannot hold him on papers alone. I know, and I cannot put her at the hotel. Half the town will claw at the windows before supper. I know that too. Clara pushed herself upright. I will not be hidden again. Jonah looked at her. No, I mean it. I will not be taken to another empty building and told it is kindness. I said no. His voice was rough enough that she paused. Jonah took off his hat. He held it in both hands, turning the brim once as if searching for the right place to begin. The rocking R has a spare room, he said. Not a shack. Not a corner of the barn. A room in the house with a lock on the inside and windows that face morning. My housekeeper is there. So are 3 ranch hands and a boy too nosy to let anyone sneak close. You can come until this is settled. Clara studied him. And why would I trust you? He accepted the question because he had earned it. You should not, he said. Not yet. Her gaze sharpened. But you can use me, Jonah continued. Use my roof. Use my horses. Use my name if it will keep Voss from pushing you back into the dark. Trust can wait. Doc Merriweather looked between them and said nothing. Outside, the train whistle blew again, closer this time. The noon arrival would bring mail, freight, strangers, news. Mercy Bend would be full of ears by sunset. Clara touched the tin box. I will go to your ranch, she said at last, because I am tired, and because Thomas wrote that you paid fare once. Jonah nodded. Fare once is not enough. No, she said. It is not. The sheriff went to gather riders for Miller's draw. Jonah helped Clara stand, though this time he offered her only his arm and let her decide whether to take it. She did. Together, they stepped out onto the boardwalk. Every face turned. Mrs. Pruitt whispered behind her glove. Amos Pike stood across the street, staring at the paper in the sheriff's hand, as if his brother's name had reached across miles and struck him. The hotel owner leaned in his doorway. 2 boys stopped rolling a hoop in the dust. Clara did not shrink. Jonah walked beside her all the way to his horse. He lifted her into the saddle because her strength had begun to fail, then swung up behind her, careful to leave space though there was little to spare. As they turned north, a rider came hard down the road from Miller's straw horse, lathered hat gone. It was one of the men sent ahead to the fire. He pulled up so fast the horse nearly sat back on its haunches. "Sheriff!" he shouted. "The shack's gone, burned clean down." Clara's shoulders tightened. The rider swallowed. "And there's a body in the ash." A cry broke from the boardwalk. Jonah felt Clara go cold in front of him. Silas Voss was nowhere in sight. The town had wanted proof. Now something lay in the ashes of the no-name shack, and no one knew yet whether it would save Clara Bell or bury her deeper. The ride to the Rocking R took them through country that seemed too beautiful for the ugliness chasing them. North of Mercy Bend, the land opened wide. The road ran between bunchgrass and sage, then dipped into a shallow valley where cottonwoods leaned over a creek flashing silver in the sun. Meadowlarks called from fence posts. Bess rose behind the horse in a soft brown cloud. Far off, cattle moved like dark beads along a ridge, and the wind carried the clean smell of grass, leather, and rain waiting somewhere beyond the hills. Clara rode in front of Jonah without speaking. He could feel the effort it cost her to stay upright. Every mile, her back grew heavier against the space she was determined not to cross. When the horse stumbled once on loose stone, Jonah steadied her with one hand at her waist. She flinched, then did not pull away. That was not forgiveness. It was exhaustion. He knew the difference. The Rocking R came into view near late afternoon. A two-story ranch house with a deep porch. A windmill turning slow beside the well. Barns red from old paint. Corrals full of horses. And laundry snapping on a line behind the kitchen. It was not grand by Eastern standards, but in that country it meant labor, endurance, and roots. A woman came out onto the porch before they reached the yard. She was stout, gray-haired, and carried a wooden spoon like a weapon. "Jonah Reed," she called. "If you tracked blood onto my clean floor again." Then she saw Clara. The spoon lowered. "This is Mrs. Clara Bell," Jonah said as he dismounted. "She needs rest, food, and no questions until she is ready." The housekeeper's face softened without becoming pitying. That was a rare gift. "I am Mrs. Hale," she said. "My given name is Edith, but only men trying to borrow pie call me that. Come in, child." "I am not a child," Clara said quietly. "No, but you are swaying like one in church after skipping breakfast." For the first time all day, something almost like a smile touched Clara's mouth. Jonah helped her down. This time she leaned on him because there was no audience. That hurt too, in a different way. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, warm bread, beeswax, and cedar. Sunlight lay across braided rugs. A rifle rested above the mantel. On one wall hung a small frame drawing of a young woman with dark eyes and a mischievous mouth. Clara saw it before Jonah could turn her away. "Your wife?" she asked. "My sister," Jonah said. There was a silence. "Is she living?" "No." Clara looked at him then. Not with softness exactly, but with recognition. Grief knows grief, even when it distrusts the face carrying it. Mrs. Hale guided Clara upstairs to a room with white curtains and a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Jonah remained in the hall until he heard the door close. Then he went outside and stood by the chopping block until his hands stopped shaking. He had faced stampedes, blizzards, and Comanche arrows in his younger years. None of them had undone him like Clara's question. "Your wife?" No. His wife had never existed. He had been engaged once to a schoolteacher named Mary Alice, but she married a merchant in Denver after Ruth's disgrace settled over the Reed name like coal smoke. Jonah had told himself he did not blame her. My baby, he even believed it. But after that, he turned his life into work, fences, cattle, hiring, ledgers, repairs. A man could hide useful things for years, until a widow walked out of a burning lie and made usefulness look like cowardice. That evening, Clara came downstairs in a borrowed dress of Mrs. Hale's, pinned at the waist and sleeves rolled twice. The black widow's bonnet was gone. Her hair had been combed and braided, though loose strands still framed her tired face. The ranch hands fell silent at the supper table. There were three of them: Ben Crowder, broad as a barn door and gentle with horses; Luis Ortega, who could rope a calf faster than anyone in the county; and young Peter Finch, 15, all elbows, curiosity, and appetite. They had enough from town to know not to ask, and enough from Jonah's face to know asking would be foolish. Mrs. Hale served stew, biscuits, and coffee. Clara ate slowly, as if her body did not trust food to remain available. After supper, she stood to help clear dishes. Mrs. Hale waved her down. "Sit, I can work." "No one said you could not. No one said you could not. I need Jonah. Look up." Clara's hand tightened around a plate. "I have taken too much today. A bed, food, a horse. Your name standing between me and trouble. I will not sit like a charity case." Mrs. Hale opened her mouth, but Jonah spoke first. "The account books need copying." Clara looked at him. "So do supply lists," he continued. "My handwriting makes merchants weep. If your arm can manage it, I can pay fair." A small line appeared between her brows. "Pay for work, not kindness." "No." Mrs. Hale's expression approved. Clara sat again. "I can copy ledgers, I figured." "Why?" "Thomas wrote your name mattered on paper. Men who value a woman's name often value her mind too." She looked down at the plate in her hands. For one moment, her face nearly broke. Then she set the plate aside and said, "Bring me the ledgers." By lantern light, Clara Bell began to work at Jonah Reed's kitchen table. The house settled around them. Mrs. Hale hummed while washing dishes. Peter fell asleep in a chair until Ben dragged him out by the collar. Outside, coyotes called from the ridge, and the wind pressed softly against the windows. Jonah brought the ranch books and laid them before Clara. She read the columns with care, her finger moving down feed costs, cattle sales, bank interest, rail freight, and equipment notes. He expected her to copy slowly because of the wound in her arm. Instead, she frowned. "This figure is wrong." Jonah leaned over the table. "Which?" "The interest on your banknote. It changes here." She tapped one page. "And again here. Did you agree to a variable rate?" "No." "Did Mr. Voss say you were late?" "Once." "I was not." She turned another page. "He charged you twice for the same extension." Jonah stared at the ledger. Clara pulled a blank sheet close and began writing numbers in a clean, steady hand. Not childish, not clumsy. The hand of a woman who had balanced household accounts, freight pay, food credit, and survival with the patience of someone who knew pennies could decide whether a lamp stayed lit. After a while, she turned the page toward him. "He has taken $43.70 more than your agreement allows." Jonah's jaw hardened. Silas had not only pressed his wound, he had been bleeding his ranch. Clara watched his face. "You did not know?" "No, neither did I," she said. "About Thomas's papers, about how many copies he made, about why he worried." The lantern flame shifted between them. Jonah sat across from her. "Tell me about him." Pain moved through her eyes, but she did not look away. "Thomas was not ran," she said. "He sang badly. He burned coffee. He believed any dog that followed him for more than 2 streets had become his responsibility. He wanted land because he said a man who kept moving too long forgot how to be gentle." Jonah smiled faintly despite himself. Clara touched the edge of the paper. "He was the first person who spoke to me as if my answer mattered before him." She was quiet, long enough that Jonah thought she might refuse. "My father died owing money," she said at last. "My mother took in washing until her hands split. When she passed, I worked in a boarding house. People saw my apron before they saw my face. Thomas saw both. Jonah understood more than she knew. Clara's voice lowered. When Silas called me a liar in front of the church, it was not only the land. It was as if he reached back and stole every year I had fought to become more than a hungry girl with lowered eyes. Jonah looked toward the framed drawing of Ruth. My sister was called a thief, he said. Clara grew still. She was not, he continued. But a man with money said she was, and a town that liked easy answers believed him. I said nothing until proof came. Why? The question was not cruel. That made it harder. Jonah's throat tightened. Because I was afraid. Our parents had died. The ranch was under debt. I thought, if I angered the wrong man, we would lose everything. So I waited for the truth to save her. Clara's eyes shone in the lamplight. Truth does not walk by itself. No, he said. It does not. From outside came the sound of hoofbeats. Jonah stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. A rider approached the house at a gallop. Ben shouted from the bunkhouse. Dogs barked. Jonah reached the porch as Sheriff Nolan rode into the yard. Hat low, face grim. Clara appeared behind Jonah, one hand pressed to her bandaged arm. The sheriff dismounted. We found Will Barden alive, Jonah asked. For now, Clara stepped forward. And the body, Sheriff Nolan looked at her. Then at Jonah. It was not Will, he said. It was a stranger, burned too bad to name. Clara's face paled. The sheriff reached into his coat and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. This was found in the ash beneath him. He unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a brass button stamped with the mark of the Union Pacific Rail Service. Clara's breath caught. Jonah turned to her. What is it? She touched the button with trembling fingers. Thomas had one like this, she whispered. From his coat, Sheriff Nolan's expression tightened. Mrs. Bell, there is talk already that the body might be your husband. Clara looked up, stunned. Jonah felt the whole night tilt. If the town could be made to believe Thomas Bell had not died months ago in a railroad camp, then Clara's story could be twisted again. A living husband, a false grave, a forged marriage, a burned body no one could name. Silas Voss was not defending himself. He was building a new lie before the old one collapsed. The next morning, Mercy Ben woke hungry for a scandal and found one waiting. By breakfast, the story had already changed 3 times. At the hotel, they said Clara Bell had fled the line shack because a lover came to claim her. At the mercantile, they said Thomas Bell might have never died. Outside the saloon, a drunk insisted the burned man was a federal marshal. And by noon, someone else swore he had seen Silas Voss shake hands with a stranger by the depot 2 nights before. The truth, as always, had to travel slower because it carried weight. Jonah rode into town with Clara beside him in a buckboard. He wanted her to stay at the ranch, but she refused. I have been talked about in my absence long enough, she said. So they came together. Mercy Ben watched them arrive. Clara wore a plain gray dress Mrs. Hale had altered overnight, and a dark shawl over her shoulders. The bandage at her wrist was visible when she climbed down. Jonah stayed close but did not touch her unless needed. That mattered. People noticed. Outside the church, Amos Pike waited with his hat in his hands. He was a large man, made larger by sorrow, with soot in the lines of his palms and a beard gone white at the edges. His eyes fixed on Clara as she stepped onto the boardwalk. My brother Caleb married you? He asked. Clara nodded. Sachel, why me? Why did you not come to me? I did not know you were his brother until yesterday. Amos looked ashamed, though he had done nothing wrong, except live in a town where wrong had become convenient. I had a letter from Caleb last winter, he said. He mentioned marrying a freight man and a young woman, with a voice soft as creek water, but a spine like hickory. Clara's eyes filled. He wrote that? Amos nodded. I thought nothing of it. Folks pass through. My brother has married half the frontier by now, Jonah asked. Do you still have the letter? At the house, Amos looked toward the bank. But it might not stand as legal proof. No, Clara said softly, but it stands as memory. That was enough to make Mrs. Prout, who had been listening from the church steps, turn away. Sheriff Nolan had called a public inquiry in the church hall because his office could not hold the crowd. It was not a trial, he told everyone. It was a gathering of facts, but the benches filled as though hanging day had arrived. Ranchers leaned against walls. Women clustered with fans and tight mouths. The saloon girls stood near the back, not invited but unwilling to miss the ruin of a man who had judged them from bank windows for years. Silas Voss arrived last. He wore a black coat and carried a leather folder. His confidence had returned, polished and cold. Jonah felt Clara stiffen beside him. You do not have to sit through this, he murmured. Yes, she said. I do. The sheriff began with the papers from the tin box. He read the marriage copy, the bank receipt, Thomas' letter, and the land note. Each item made the room shift, not enough to declare Clara vindicated, but enough to make some eyes drop in embarrassment. Then Silas stood. I grieve for any woman lost in confusion, he said, and Jonah's hands curled into fists. But we must not let sentiment overthrow order. These copies appeared only after a fire destroyed a shack and left an unidentified body. I have here statements from two men who saw Thomas Bell in town weeks after Mrs. Bell claims he died. A murmur ran through the room. Clara whispered, No. Silas opened his folder. One statement from Mr. Luther Grimes, proprietor of the saloon. Another from Mr. Owen Keene, freight handler. Sheriff Nolan took the papers and read. Jonah knew Luther Grimes. The saloon owner would sign anything that kept his whiskey credit open. Owen Keene owed Silas half his wages before he earned them. But a signed lie still weighed more than an unsigned truth in certain rooms. Silas turned toward Clara. If Thomas Bell lived after the date you gave, then either you were deceived or you are deceiving us. In either case, your claim is void until a county judge can determine whether there was bigamy, fraud, or worse. Worse? Clara asked. Silas's eyes shone. To burn man in a shack where you were meant to be found, Mrs. Bell. Forgive me, but questions must be asked. The room erupted. Jonah rose. His voice cut through the noise. Enough. Silas looked at him with satisfaction. Mr. Reed, your loyalty is touching, but perhaps misplaced. No, Jonah said. My loyalty was misplaced 3 days ago. I am correcting it. That silenced some. Jonah stepped into the aisle. He had not planned to speak. Plans belonged to men who still thought life gave them time to arrange courage in neat rows. My sister Ruth was accused in this town 9 years ago, he said. The change in the room was instant. Older townspeople looked at the floor. Younger ones leaned forward, sensing history they had only heard whispered. Jonah kept going, because stopping now would be another kind of cowardice. She was accused by a traveling merchant named Daniel Voss. Silas' head snapped up. Your cousin, Jonah said. Silas' mouth hardened. A disreputable relation with no bearing here. He accused her of stealing $20. You urged the town to let the accusation stand until proof could be found. Proof came 6 weeks later when Daniel Voss was caught with marked coins in Laramia. Mrs. Prout's fan stilled. Jonah's throat burned. By then, Ruth had left. She died 2 years later. I said nothing when I should have stood beside her. I told myself records would fix what people had broken. Clara's eyes were on him. He did not look away from the room. I will not make that mistake twice. Silas spoke through his teeth. This is sentimental theater. No, Jonah said. It is pattern. At the back of the hall, one of the saloon girls stepped forward. Her name was May Holloway. She had red hair, tired eyes, and more courage than most men present. "I saw Will Barton with Mr. Voss the night before the fire," she said. Silas turned. "Careful," May laughed once. "You spent 5 years telling me I had no reputation to lose. Do not threaten me with the truth now." The room stirred again. Sheriff Nolan straightened. "May, come forward." She did. "I was sweeping the saloon porch after closing," May said. Barton came out the alley behind the bank stable. Mr. Voss gave him something wrapped in paper. I heard him say, "No scraps this time." I did not know what it meant until the shack burned. Silas' face drained. "That woman is a known liar," he said. May smiled sadly. "Not known, just convenient." The door opened then, and Deputy Harris entered with Will Barton between two riders. Will looked worse than any lie could make him. One eye swollen, lips split, shirt torn. He had tried to run and failed badly. His gaze flickered over the room until it found Silas Voss. Then fear made him look away. Sheriff Nolan stood. "Will Barton, did you set fire to the no-name line shack?" Will swallowed. Silas said, "You do not have to answer without counsel." Will laughed weakly. "You paying for counsel too, Mr. Voss?" The room went still enough to hear the church clock ticking. Silas did not move. Will looked at the sheriff. "I did not know she was inside." Clara's hand gripped the edge of the bench. Jonah stepped closer to her. Will continued, voice shaking. "May and another man rode out before dawn. We were told she would be gone by then. Told to burn whatever papers she might have left." Sheriff Nolan asked, "Who was the other man?" Will's mouth opened. A gunshot cracked outside. The church window shattered. People screamed. Benches overturned. Jonah threw himself over Clara, pulling her down as glass rained across the floor. Sheriff Nolan drew his revolver. Men shouted. Horses outside screamed and pulled at hitching rails. Will Barton fell backward, blood spreading across his shoulder. "Not dead," Jonah saw. "Hit high," meant to silence, not kill clean. Through the broken window, a rider wheeled away from the alley beside the church. Jonah saw only a dark coat, a gray horse, and a flash of brass on the saddle. He knew the horse. It belonged to Owen Keene, the freight handler who had signed Silas' statement. Jonah rose to chase, but Clara caught his sleeve. "Jonah." He looked down. Her hand was bleeding from a shard of glass. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. "Not alone," she said. 2 words, trust and warning together. He knelt beside her, torn between rage and fear. Sheriff Nolan shouted orders. Men ran for horses. May pressed cloth to Will's wound. Silas Voss had disappeared in the chaos. Clara looked at the broken window, then at the blood on the church floor. "He will not stop," she said. Jonah followed her gaze. "No," he said. "He will not." Outside, the church bell began to swing wildly, struck by some panicked hand. Its ringing filled Mercy Bend with alarm. And beneath that sound, Jonah understood the truth at last. Silas Voss was not trying to win an argument. He was trying to bury everyone who could prove Clara Bell had a name. By sundown, Mercy Bend was divided between those who wanted justice and those who wanted supper without inconvenience. That was how towns often revealed themselves, not between good and evil, but between people willing to be troubled and people who thought peace meant leaving the powerful undisturbed. Will Barton survived the gunshot, though Doc Merriweather said he would not travel for days. He gave enough of a statement to tighten the noose around Silas Voss, but not enough to hang him. Yes, he had been paid to burn the shack. Yes, he had seen papers taken from Clara's hotel room before she was sent away. Yes, Owen Keene had ridden with him. But when asked whether Silas ordered it, Will closed his eyes and said only, "A man can be killed for less than naming money." Owen Keene vanished. Silas Voss shut the bank and sent word that any accusations against him would be handled by attorneys at the county seat. He also sent a sealed notice to the Rocking R Jonah opened it on his porch by lantern light, while Clara sat nearby, sewing a tear in Peter's coat, because the boy had tried to climb through a high loft window and lost an argument with a nail. Jonah read the notice once, then again. Clara, bang, is calling my note. Mrs. Hale, who had been shelling peas by the door, stopped. He cannot. He can try. Clara set the coat down. Because of me. Jonah folded the paper carefully. Because of him, that is not the same as untrue. He looked at her across the lamplight. Clara, you offered me your roof, she said. I did not ask you to risk the ground beneath it. I should have risked it sooner. No, her voice sharpened. Do not use guilt and call it courage. They are not the same. The words landed hard because they were cleanly aimed. Jonah looked away toward the dark pasture. Crickets sang in the grass. A lantern moved near the barn, where Louise checked a mare due to foal. Beyond the corrals, the prairie lay under moonlight, wide and indifferent to banknotes, rumors, and men with guns. What would you have me do? He asked. Clara's hands folded in her lap. Tell me the truth of what this ranch means to you. He almost gave the easy answer. Land, work, cattle, home. But she had asked for truth, and after all they had suffered from lies, he could not insult her with less. It was my father's hope, he said. My mother's grave. Ruth's favorite place. Every fence line is something I fixed because I could not fix what happened to her. If I lose it, I lose the last place where I still know who I was before I failed. Clara's expression changed. Not pity. Understanding. I know something about a place holding the last of a person. Cottonwood Creek was Thomas's promise. Not because it was fine land, because he believed we could become new there. Jonah sat beside her, leaving a respectful space between them. You still want it? She looked toward the north, though the creek land lay east. I want the right to choose what I do with it. That is what Silas stole first. Not land, choice. Jonah nodded. After a while, he reached into his coat and withdrew the notice again. If I let Voss scare me quiet, then the ranch is already lost. Clara looked at him. He stood. At first light, I am going to town. I will stand before anyone willing to listen and say I took you to that shack. I will say it was wrong. I will say Voss pressed me with threats and old shame, and I let him. Then I will ride to the county seat with you and your papers, whether he calls my note or not. Clara rose slowly. That could ruin you. Yes, people might not forgive you. They should not too quickly. She studied him in the porch light, as if weighing whether this was another fine speech men make when night forgives them too easily. And if I tell you I do not need you to bleed for my name, she asks, Jonah's voice gentle. Sir, I would say I am bleeding for mine too. The wind moved between them. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped. Clara stepped closer, close enough that Jonah could see the gold flecks in her tired brown eyes. I wanted to hate you, she said. I know, it would have been easier. Yes, you looked at me that day by the church like you knew I was telling the truth. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. I did. Then, why did you take me? The question had lived between them from the start. Now it stood bare. Because Silas said if I sheltered you, he would call my note. Because half the town looked at me, waiting to see whether I would make trouble. Because the sheriff asked for peace. Because I told myself the shack was temporary. Because I was a coward with reasons. Clara's eyes shone. Reasons can dress cowardice very nicely. Yes. She turned away, one hand against the porch post. Jonah did not reach for her. At last she said, Tomorrow when you speak, do not make me sound helpless. He looked up. I am poor, she said. I am widowed. I am tired beyond sense, but I am not helpless. No, he said. You are not. And do not speak because you want me to forgive you. I want, she faced him again. Speak because the next woman who stands alone in that street should not have to be braver than every man watching. Jonah felt something in his chest break open. I will, he said. Before dawn, the ranch was awake. Mrs. Hale packed bread, bacon, coffee, and 2 apples in a sack, as if provisions could hold back disaster. Ben and Louis saddled horses. Peter tried to come until Mrs. Hale caught him by the ear and reminded him, courage did not excuse chores. Clara wore her own black dress again. Mrs. Hale had mended the sleeve and brushed the dust from the hem. The widow's bonnet was tied beneath Clara's chin, but she looked different than she had when she first arrived in Mercy Bend. Not less wounded, more anchored. Jonah brought the buckboard around. You should ride inside the wagon, he said. I walked out of the no-name shack on my own feet, sir. Clara replied. I can ride into town, sitting upright. He did not argue. They were halfway to Mercy Bend when they found the road blocked. A cottonwood had been felled across the narrow bridge over Miller's Run. Not blown down. Cut! Fresh chips scattered the bank. Water rushed beneath, swollen from rain in the hills. Ben swore under his breath. Louise rode ahead, then turned. We can move it, but it will take time. Clara looked at the cut trunk. He knew we would come this way. Jonah scanned the ridge. Too quiet. Then a rifle cracked. The wagon horse screamed and reared. Jonah lunged for the reins. Ben shouted. Louis drew his gun and fired toward the rocks above the creek. Another shot splintered the wagon's side inches from Clara's hand. Jonah grabbed her and pulled her down behind the buckboard. Stay low. I am low. That was not criticism. Even then, with bullets striking wood, she gave him a look so sharp it almost made him laugh. Almost. Ben and Louis returned fire. The hidden shooter moved along the ridge, boots sliding on stone. Jonah caught a glimpse of gray horse through brush. Owen Keene. The freight handler had not fled far. He had been waiting. Clara reached for the tin box tucked beneath the wagon seat. Jonah caught her wrists. Leave it. No, Clara, no paper is worth your life. Her eyes flashed. Men keep deciding that for me. She pulled free and crawled toward the seats as another shot cracked overhead. Jonah covered her, firing twice toward the ridge. Louis spurred his horse through the creek shallows, circling wide. Ben moved to the fallen cottonwood, using it as cover. Clara reached the box just as the wagon horse bolted sideways, snapping one trace. The buckboard lurched. Clara slipped. Jonah caught her arm before she went over the edge of the bridge. For one terrible second, she hung above the rushing water, bonnet ribbons whipping in the wind. Tin box clutched against her chest. Let go of the box, Jonah shouted. No, Clara. Her eyes met his, not fear, fury, life. He braced his boots against the wagon wheel and pulled with everything he had. Pain tore through his shoulder. Clara slammed against the bridge planks, gasping, but still holding the box. Above them, a cry rang out. Louise had reached the ridge. A horse crashed through brush. A man cursed. Then a gun fired once more. Silence followed. Jonah dragged Clara behind the wagon, both of them breathing hard. You are the most stubborn woman God ever placed west of the Missouri, he said. She coughed, then gave a shaky laugh. Thomas said east of it too. The sound stunned them both. It was the first true laugh Jonah had heard from her. It ended quickly, but it had existed. Louise came riding down, minutes later, with Owen Keene tied across his saddle, alive but bleeding from a graze and cursing everyone's ancestry. In Owen's coat pocket, they found a folded bank draft signed by Silas Voss and a note in Silas' hand. Delay them before County Road. Retrieve box if possible. Not stop. Not frighten. Retrieve. The tin box mattered because something in it could still ruin Silas beyond repair. Clara held it in her lap the rest of the way to town. When they reached Mercy Bend, Jonah did exactly what he had promised. He stood in the middle of the street, outside the bank's locked door, with Clara beside him, and half the town gathering before the dust had settled. "I helped send Clara Bell to the no-name line shack," he said. The street went quiet. "I did it because I listened to a man with money instead of a woman with truth. I did it because I feared for my ranch. I did it because old shame made me weak. There are reasons, none are excuses." Clara stood still beside him, eyes forward. Jonah continued. "She told this town who she was. We took too long to hear her. If Silas Voss wants my ranch for saying so, he can try. But he will not have my silence too." For a moment no one moved. Then Amos Pike stepped off the boardwalk and stood beside Clara. "I have my brother's letter," he said. May Holloway came next, red hair bright beneath her hat. "I saw what I saw." Doc Merriweather crossed the street. Then Mrs. Hale, who had ridden in behind them with Peter, despite ordering him to stay home. Then Ben and Luis. Then, slowly, others. Not all. Never all. But enough that Mercy Bend looked different by the time Silas Voss opened the bank door. He stared at a line of people standing with the widow he had tried to erase. Clara took one step forward, tin box in her arm. "Mr. Voss," she said, her voice clear, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Silas smiled then, thin and dangerous. "My dear Mrs. Bell," he said, "I believe you will have to prove that in court." From behind them, the train whistle blew. The county judge was due on that train for his monthly circuit stop. So was the mail. And perhaps, if Mercy had not spent itself entirely, one more piece of truth. The train came in under a sky the color of hammered tin. Mercy Bend gathered at the depot, as if the whole town had become one body with too many anxious hands. The platform smelled of coal smoke, wet wood, and hot iron. Porters unloaded crates. A woman in a feathered hat complained about dust. Two cowboys argued over a trunk. Through it all, Clara Bell stood beside Jonah Reed, with the tin box held in both hands and the wind tugging at her black skirts. Silas Voss remained near the freight office, speaking quietly to a lawyer who had stepped down from the first passenger car. The lawyer looked tired already. Sheriff Nolan held Owen Keene under guard. Will Barton, pale and bandaged, had been brought in a wagon by Doc Merriweather because fear of death had made him more helpful than fear of Silas. The county judge arrived last. Judge Horace Bellamy was short, round, and unimpressed by crowds. He had white side whiskers, a cane he did not seem to need, and eyes sharp enough to cut thread. "I was told there was an urgent property matter," he said. Sheriff Nolan looked at Clara. "More than property, Judge. They moved the hearing to the schoolhouse because the church window was still broken, and because Judge Bellamy said he preferred children's desks to holy echoes when men were likely to lie." The room filled quickly. Rain began while they gathered, ticking against the roof and streaking the windows. The smell of chalk and damp wool mixed with lantern oil. Clara sat at the front with Jonah on one side and Amos Pike on the other. Silas sat opposite, his lawyer beside him, his watch chain bright as a blade. Judge Bellamy heard the story without interruption. He examined the marriage copy, Thomas's letter, the receipt bearing Clara's name, Amos' letter from Reverend Pike, May's statement, Will Barton's confession, Owen Keene's bank draft, and the note ordering delay. Silas' lawyer objected often. Judge Bellamy ignored him often. At last the judge held up the bank receipt. "Mr. Voss, this appears to include the widow's name." Silas folded his hands. "A forgery, and the handwriting imitated the note found on Owen Keene. A private collection matter unrelated to Mrs. Bell. The fire, criminal mischief by desperate men. The missing original records." Silas spread his hands. "Misfiled, perhaps. Frontier offices are imperfect." Clara listened to each answer. She had expected anger to rise. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. Silas had only one weapon left. He would make truth seem complicated until people grew tired of holding it. Judge Bellamy leaned back. Mrs. Bell, you said there was one paper you did not understand. Clara opened the tin box. Her fingers found the folded sheet Thomas had hidden beneath the shack floor, tucked inside a torn envelope addressed to Silas Voss. She had read it by lantern light the night before the fire, then at Jonah's table, and again on the ride into town. Still, its meaning had seemed just beyond her reach. She handed it to the judge. He unfolded it. The room waited. His brows drew together, then lifted. Mr. Voss, he said slowly, this is a purchase option. Silas' face went still. Judge Bellamy continued, for the Cottonwood Creek parcel and adjacent water access to be transferred from Thomas Bell to the Voss Land Company in the event no legal spouse or heir claimed within 60 days of death. Clara felt Jonah shift beside her. The judge looked over his spectacles. The amount promised is considerable. Silas said nothing. Clara understood then. The land was not valuable because of the cabin Thomas wanted to build. It was valuable because of the creek. Cottonwood water ran through open range Silas hoped to control. If Clara had no name, no marriage, no legal standing, Thomas's land could be swallowed quietly and sold dear. Judge Bellamy tapped the paper, and here, in the margin, Thomas Bell wrote, void. My wife Clara arrives by spring. Voss presses too hard. A sound moved through the room. Silas' lawyer closed his eyes. The judge's voice hardened. Mr. Voss, do you deny receiving this document? Silas stood. I deny nothing until proper proceedings. The schoolhouse door opened. Everyone turned. A thin man in a rain-dark coat stood on the threshold, holding a leather satchel. His beard was gray, his boots muddy, and his collar carried the dust of long roads. Amos Pike rose so quickly his chair fell backward. Caleb, he whispered. Reverend Caleb Pike removed his hat. I was told in Cheyenne that Mercy Ben had trouble with a widow's name, he said. So I came as fast as the rails allowed. Clara stood, but her knees weakened. Jonah steadied her with a hand beneath her elbow. This time she did not flinch. Reverend Pike walked to the front of the room and looked at Clara with kind, tired eyes. You are Clara Whitcomb Bell, he said, married to Thomas Bell on the 17th day of December, witnessed by myself and Sergeant Miles Arlen, now deceased. Thomas wore a brown coat with a rail button because he had only one good coat and apologized for it twice. A broken sound escaped Clara. Reverend Pike opened his satchel and withdrew a small ledger. I keep copies of all marriages I perform. Learned that from my mother, who trusted God but not careless men. A faint ripple of laughter went through the room and died quickly. The judge took the ledger. There it was. Thomas Bell, Clara Whitcomb, joined in marriage. No rumor could smudge it. No banker could misfile it. No town could pretend it had not heard. Clara pressed one hand over her mouth. Jonah felt her tremble and wanted, more than anything he had wanted in years, to take the burden from her. But this moment was hers. Her name, her truth, her standing in a world that had tried to make her vanish. Judge Bellamy closed the ledger. That settles the marriage. Silas began to speak, but the judge struck his cane once against the floor. It also raises grave questions concerning fraud, arson, coercion, attempted suppression of evidence, and conspiracy to deprive a lawful widow of property. Sheriff Nolan stepped toward Silas. For the first time since Clara had known him, Silas Voss looked not angry, not polished, not offended. Afraid. This is temporary, she said. You cannot prove. Will Barton spoke from the back, voice weak but clear. He paid me, May Holloway added. I saw him. Owen Keene, sweating under guard, looked at Silas and made his choice as cowards often do. late and for themselves. He said the widow had to disappear from the records before the judge came. The room erupted. Judge Bellamy ordered silence. Sheriff Nolan took Silas by the arm. The banker resisted once, then saw the faces around him and stopped. As he was led past Clara, his mouth twisted. "You think this makes you somebody?" he hissed. Clara looked at him. For weeks she had imagined what she might say if the truth ever stood between them. Something grand, something sharp, something that would cut him the way he had cut her. But in that moment, she felt only tired of carrying his measure. "No," she said. "I was somebody before you lied." Silas had no answer. When the sheriff took him out into the rain, Mercy Bend watched. Not proudly. Not yet. There was too much shame for pride. Too many people remembered their own silence. Mrs. Brett cried into a handkerchief. Whether for Clara or herself, no one could say. Luther Grimes slipped out the side door. Amos Pike held his brother's shoulder. May stood straight in the back of the room. Finally believed in a place that had doubted her for sport. Judge Bellamy restored Clara's claim provisionally, pending county filing, and ordered the bank records seized. He also suspended action on Jonah's ranch note until the accounts could be examined. When it was done, Clara stepped outside. The rain had softened the street. Dust turned dark and fragrant beneath it. The church bell rang once, not in alarm now, but because someone had decided the town needed to hear a different sound. Jonah came to stand beside her under the schoolhouse awning. For a while, neither spoke. Across the street, Silas Voss was being placed in the sheriff's wagon. People watched him go, but Clara looked beyond him toward the road south. The road to Miller's Draw. The road to the ashes of the no-name shack. "I want to see it," she said. Jonah knew what she meant. No. He saddled 2 horses. They rode through the light rain without hurry. The prairie smelled washed clean. Water jeweled the grass. Clouds broke in the west, letting a pale gold light spill under their edges. When they reached the place where the line shack had stood, little remained but blackened stones, warped nails, and smoke-dark earth. The old signpost near the door had burned halfway through. Its board had always been blank. No name painted, no welcome offered. Clara dismounted. Jonah stayed back while she walked among the ashes. Here was where she had slept under a leaking roof, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of mice and old smoke. Here was where she had read Thomas's letter by lantern light. Here was she had heard footsteps before dawn and understood that some men would rather burn a widow than admit she had rice. She knelt and touched the earth. "I thought this place would be where I disappeared," she said. Jonah stood a few paces away, hat in hand despite the rain. "It is where you came out." She looked back at him. Something in those words moved through her slowly. "It is where you came out. Not ruined, not nameless, not hidden. Alive." Jonah took a step closer. I cannot undo what I did. No, I can spend my life choosing differently." Clara rose. Rain clung to her lashes. "Do not promise a life because of 1 week's guilt." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were serious. "You have a stern habit of saving me from noble foolishness. Someone should." "I am not asking for forgiveness as a bargain," he said. "And I am not asking you to forget Thomas. I would not respect you if you could." Her breath caught softly. Jonah continued, "I am asking whether, when the land is settled and the town quiets and you have every right to go build the life you wanted for you, you might allow me to court you proper, slowly, honestly, with no claim except the one I earn." Clara looked toward Cottonwood Creek country. She thought of Thomas, who had loved her when she was still learning how to stand in her own skin. Thomas, who had written her name everywhere it mattered. Thomas, who would not have wanted his promise to become a prison. Then she looked at Jonah, not the man who had failed her, The man who had chosen at costs not to remain that man. I do not know what my heart can become, she said. I can wait. I might be difficult. I have cattle. That startled a laugh from her. Small but real. He smiled then, and she saw how rare that expression was on him. It changed his whole face, not making him younger exactly, but making him look like a man who had found a window open in a house long shut. Clara walked to the burned signpost. With both hands, she lifted the blank board from where it had fallen in the mud. This place needs a name, she said. Jonah looked at the ashes. What would you call it? She thought for a long moment. Witness, she said. So they took the board back to the rocking R. Weeks passed. Silas Foss was sent to the county jail to await trial. His bank was examined, and half the town discovered he had been shaving coins from their fear for years. Jonah's note was corrected. Clara's claim at Cottonwood Creek was recognized. Reverend Pike performed Sunday service before moving on, and his sermon was not about lies as everyone expected, but about the courage required to repair what truth reveals. Mercy Bend did not become good overnight. No town does. Mrs. Pert apologized in a stiff voice. Then again weeks later, in a softer one. Sheriff Nolan learned to move faster. May Holloway was invited to sit in the church's third pew and dared anyone to comment. Amos Pike painted the word witness on the old board in strong black letters. Clara moved to Cottonwood Creek in early summer, not because she had to leave the rocking R, but because choice mattered. Jonah and his hands helped raise a small cabin near the water. Ben set the roof beams. Luis built the corral. Peter fell into the creek twice and claimed it was for cooling purposes. Mrs. Hale planted beans by the door and scolded Clara for not owning enough towels. Jonah came often, always with a reason. A hinge to fix, a fence to check, a sack of flour Mrs. Hale supposedly sent, a mare that needed Clara's opinion. Though Clara knew very little about mares and Jonah knew a great deal, he courted her the way he promised, slowly. Honestly, he walked beside her in town without touching unless she reached first. He told her stories about Ruth. She told him stories about Thomas. Some days grief sat between them like a third person. Other days, it rested quietly in the corner and let them drink coffee in peace. By harvest, Clara no longer wore widow's black every day. By the first frost, Jonah kissed her hand on the cabin porch, and she led him. By spring, when meadowlarks returned and Cottonwood Creek ran bright with snowmelt, Jonah brought no excuse at all. He came in a clean shirt, with his hat in both hands and fear plain on his face. Clara opened the door and smiled. "No hinge today?" she asked. No, Sitmere requiring my expert ignorance." He laughed. "No." She stepped onto the porch. Behind her, the cabin glowed with lamplight. On the table lay Thomas's tin box, polished now, holding papers no one could steal again. Above the mantel hung a small frame drawing of Ruth that Jonah had given Clara because, he said, the house of a woman who survived lies was a fitting place for the memory of one who had not. Jonah took Clara's hands. "I love you," he said, "not because you needed saving. You did not. Not because I need forgiving. That is work I owe with or without reward. I love you because you walk through fire carrying truth and still make room for gentleness after. I love you because when you look at a broken thing, you do not ask whether it is worth saving. You ask what honest work will cost." Clara's eyes filled. "Jonah Reed," she whispered, that is a very long proposal. "I have been practicing." "And did your practicing include asking?" He swallowed. "Clara Bell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife when your heart is ready?" She looked past him to the prairie. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. A train whistle sounded far off, no longer lonely, only distant. Somewhere across the creek, a horse nickered. The world did not stop for love. It never had. It simply made room. when people were brave enough to build some. Clara thought of walking into Mercy Bend with no one beside her. She thought of walking out of the no-name shack with smoke behind her and a tin box in her arms. Then she looked at Jonah, who had learned that truth does not walk by itself. "My heart is not what it was," she said. His face tightened, ready for pain. She touched his cheek. "It is stronger now." He closed his eyes. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." The wedding took place outside the little cabin at Cottonwood Creek. Reverend Pike returned for it, claiming he disliked unfinished stories. May stood beside Clara. Amos stood beside Jonah. Mrs. Hale cried openly and denied it to anyone who mentioned it. Mercy Bend came in wagons, on horseback, and on foot, some out of affection, some out of repentance, and some because people never like missing the end of a story they helped make difficult. After the vows, Jonah and Clara rode together to Miller's Draw. The old line shack was gone, but in its place stood a small shelter for riders caught in storms. Solid roof, clean bunks, a stove that drew well, a water barrel, a shelf with matches, coffee, flour, and a Bible. Above the door hung Amos' painted board. Witness, Clara stood before it in her wedding dress, one hand in Jonah's. The town gathered behind them in the golden afternoon light. No one called her no-name widow now. They called her Clara Belle Reed, if speaking formally, Clara, if they were friends, Mrs. Reed, if they wanted Mrs. Hale to approve. But Clara knew the deepest truth. Her name had not been given back by the town. It had always been hers. The prairie wind lifted the hem of her dress. Horses stamped softly in the dust. The church bell rang in Mercy Bend, its sound traveling thin and bright across the open land. And when Clara walked out from beneath the sign of the old line shack, she did not walk alone, and she did not walk away in shame. She walked into sunlight, carrying her name, her dignity, and the home that truth had finally made room for.